Hello everyone. In this video I'm going to show you how to make a peyote star from the warp squares, and I'm also going to show you my integral support. You can see how defined the stars are by using it, and it even works on the larger star here. This means that the stars aren't stuffed and they're much lighter decorations for your tree. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to pick up 16 delicate beads. And the reason I've chosen 16 is simply because it makes it an even count. You can do 17 or 18, and I'll discuss the sizes in a little while when we finish this. So we're just going to make a peyote strip. And when I do mine, I pull the thread left and right. It really helps the first two rows sit neatly. This is actually the third row because, as you know, we pick up the first two rows, and so I should have said it lets the third row sit. No, let's just say rows 1, 2 and 3 will sit neatly if stitched like this. Do you see? You can see the bottom, how because I'm pulling the threads left and right, beads are sitting correctly and not loosely. If you do decide to, for example, pick up a count of 17 because that's the size you want, do bear in mind that you'd have to do odd count peyote, which I am sure most of you know anyway. The integral support is actually such an easy thing to do, and you can use any leftover delicate beads for this. I would recommend you use delicate beads though, because you're wanting to create a tube that's quite strong. So now we're going to just create a strip by working backwards and forwards. The reason I like this support is it's easy to make. It is a bit of a faff getting it fitted in at the end, but there's only, I suppose, 2 passes where it's really tricky, and it also helps you to add on the little buttons at the center of the star. So we're just going to carry on working in this way until we have completed 18 rows in total. So here I am, and the easiest way, if you haven't counted them, to check is to count the 2 edge rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18. And you can see when we roll it up, that the beads then will join together with just sit them up. So we're just going to work from side to side. All the way along until we get to the other side. And then I'm going to do a square stitch between these two beads, or around these two beads if you prefer. Then I'm just going to weave my thread in and out a few times to secure. So there's a nice neat tube, and that centre hole is the one we are going to pass through quite a few times. The tube will sit between the 2 points at the centre of the star. If you can try and visualize that, you can see that I could probably have fit another 1 or 2 beads on there, which would make it much tighter and sharper, but it's difficult to work. So I just chose the smaller tube in this instance. It's your personal preference what you would like to do. So I've made 5 of the granny type warp squares, and I'm just going to use the white delica beads because that's the next in the pattern. So to start off with, I'll show you how we're going to join 2 of the warp squares, and you're going to join them in this way so that you can see that will be the first point. So I'm going to pick up 1 delica bead and stitch it between the increased beads, and then we're just going to peyote all the way along this edge. If you want to use a different colour, then that obviously is fine too. We will be joining just one side of the star first before we join the other. So we're not going to join the warp square completely to the other one. Not at this point, we're just doing it halfway. so don't go too far. So this is how I'm going to join them together, two pointy up bits facing me. Now I'm going to use the increase beads and I'm going to do a square knot. I know some people don't do this, but I find that just a simple extra couple of passes creates a really neat join so that these two beads sit adjacent to each other without a gap. And then we're going to pick up one of the number 8s and we're going to pass back through the adjacent delicate bead. Now this number 8 will sit at the point of your star, so if you want to, you can add in a crystal instead of using the number 8 beads. And then we're just going to zip up down this edge by just working from side to side. One thing I would say about the number 8 beads, although they're not all nice and sparkly, they are very easy to get a jump the ring through, which makes it easier then to add a hook. Also, I have not trimmed all of the threads. You will need one thread available on the other side. Now, I use a file line join, so this thread that I'm using now, I will just keep adding more thread to until I've finished joining all of the squares together, and I will do the same on the other side. If you prefer to use all of your thread ends and you're not using file line, then you can work your thread in your preferred way. So here I am at the end, and you can see if I put in the bead here and then complete the joining row, there will be like a V-shaped gap between these two adjacent beads, and that's why I use the square stitch to close that gap up. And then we can pick up the delicate bead and turn the corner, and then we can stitch the joining row along this edge. So using the same method, you need to join on the remaining 3 warp squares. joining row, zip, joining row, zip, joining row, zip, joining row, zip. And in this way you will wind up with the thread at the center. Do not cut it. Do not cut this thread. Do not end the thread. So go ahead and do that, and I'll come back when I've finished it. So I've joined all of the 5 squares together, and I've completed the last joining row. I just haven't zipped them together because I wanted you to see what happens next. I also wanted to talk about the thread ends. You can see that I have 2 threads on the other side, or for the other side of the star. I will end one of these threads, probably this one, when I get to it. I don't like loops on my work. So we're just going to do the last join now, and we're going to leave the thread at the center. We are not going to cut it, and you'll see why very soon. So we just fold our star around. Again, we're going to use the loop at the end. We're going to put in that last number 8 bead. Make sure those 2 end beads are sat next to each other. I'll just zip these 2 together. All the way down to the center. So here we are, and I've done that, and I've done the loop at the end, and I have passed the thread through one of the delicate beads at the end, at the center rather. Now you need to trace the delicate bead, has to be on the same side. So what's the best way to describe this? Hang on, just hang on. So I've entered this bead here, and we need to follow this line, and we're going to start zipping it up from exactly the same place. That is important. Obviously I'm using file line. If you're not using file line, then you're going to need a really long length of thread on one side of the star. Because we've got to use that bead. This is really difficult to explain, and I'm not doing it well. Okay, so I'm just going to zip this first edge together. I think it will become more obvious what I'm doing than me trying to explain it before I've done it. So I'm going to go through the number 8, and then I'm going to zip this edge together. And the reason I pass through the number 8 again is because it makes it sit between those 4 beads. And then we're going to zip all the way to the center. And you might have noticed there's another needle on the mat, and that's because I'm going to be using 1 thread on one side and 1 thread on this side to do the joining. And this is where it gets a bit yikes. So it's not difficult, it's just awkward to start with. So done one join and I've done one joining row. And again, I'm going to check where my thread is exiting. And then I'm going to pass sorry, that was me adjusting a bead. I'm going to pass through the center of these 5 beads. I think I spotted an error which I've fixed and come back to. So I'm going to pass the thread on this side through to the other side, just through the center hole, and I was exiting that bead. And now I've made a mess of this too. Oh goodness. Right. Bear with me. It'll be okay. Obviously, I would advise not catching your needle through your work like this. Still, it's fixable. There we go. Now my thread is completely loose, but on this side. So here we go with the awkward bit. Now you can see this is quite a tight space, so just, it's not difficult, it's awkward. I pass this thread through the tube. Then what we're going to do is put the tube inside the star, and then we are going to pass through the center bead between the increased 2 beads, this one here. Okay. And then we are going to pass back through the tube. Be careful not to catch any of the delicate beads on the tube. You want to go straight through the tube and back out through the center of those 5 beads. To be honest with you, the first one or the first 1 and 2 are the worst. So I'm just going to trace back, and then I'm going to exit the bead that we started with before we made the first pass. And then you can see that on the next pass we're going to pass through this bead. So I've pulled that in tight. And then I'm going to pass through the center again. And I have, make sure that you are passing through that core tube. And then we're going to pass through the next bead at the center, back through the core again. You're making sure we come out at the center of those 5 beads on the other side. And then we're going to pass through. Ugh, I've got my thread all covered up. Oh, it's got it. So trace it back again. Come through the appropriate bead on this side of the star. And then we're going to switch to the thread that is on this side, leaving the other one alone for the moment. And we're going to make this join. So again, it's a square stitch. We can pass through the number 8 and through the adjacent bead. Once you've got your thread sitting correctly, and then we're just going to zip these two edges together. So once we get all the way to the center, we're just going to put in that bead and complete the joining row, and then you're going to complete another pass just as you did before. So that's the joining row done. And I'm just going to show you that pass just once more. Through the center, you can see now that the tube is sat upright and it's much easier to work with. So we're going to pass through the bead here that you've just stitched at the start of your joining row, and then back through the center, and then follow the line back round to make sure that you're exiting the next bead. And then return to the thread that's on this side of the star and complete all of these joins. Do not end the threads. This one will end up at the center on this side, but do not enter, don't end the threads, okay? Because we're going to use them to very easily attach these buttons either side at the center. So here we are, I've got a thread on each side, and I'm just going to stitch through these 5 beads just so that they sit nicely, because I'm a bit finicky. If you've got a large button, it wouldn't matter. I just find that this brings, if you take the time to do this, it brings the 5 center beads into a nice circle. Be careful when you're adding the crystals. When I made this star, I did snap the thread, and if the thread snaps, there's no alternative other than to take your thread back a few stitches and join in a new row. So I've done that. I'm going to come through this side. And then I'm going to use the other thread to go through to the other side. Should have mentioned that I have joined the other 5 beads. So now I've crossed the 2 threads over, and each thread is floating at the center of that tube. And now we're going to join the buttons. So I'm going to leave 1 thread on the other side, and I'm only going to use the thread that I'm working with at the moment to add the 2 crystals. So I've just gone through the crystal, I've picked up a delicate bead, then I'm going through the crystal and center 5 on the other side. And then I'm going to pick up the next crystal, don't be tempted to finish off that thread, it's really useful. You'll see why in a second. So you should do this pass, because it's a crystal, maybe 2 or 3 times. Don't try to yank your thread in hard, because that is how I excuse me, words. That is how I cut my thread. So just gently pass through at least 2 times, preferably 3. And the last pass that you do, you want to come out underneath the crystal on the same side as your other thread. And this is because this is a really, really easy way to end your thread. And there's Nova. He's not liking somebody on the path and not being helpful with my tutorial. So here we go. We're going to do several half-hitch knots using these 2 threads. It's really easy to do. It means you don't have to try and weave back through those beads and maybe crack one apart, because when you're using the core, it does get very tight. It depends how long you made your core, and it does get really, really tight. So it's possible that you could crack a bead if you try just working those threads back in. So because these are hidden under the crystal, we can just go ahead and trim these out now. So there's no thread ends anywhere poking out. And as I said in the beginning, these number 8s at the top, I love putting the crystals at the edges or the points of my stars. But using number 8 is really great. It's so easy to put the jump rings through it. I also like to use the eye pins to create a little S-shaped hook. Which is a really great way to suspend your star from your tree. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and go on to use the internal support in your other stars. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.